My name is Jennifer Blake, and I was 47 years old when they decided I had outlived my usefulness. For nearly a quarter of a century, I devoted myself to Crestview Logistics, a modest but stable company nestled in the industrial outskirts of Chicago. I wasn't anyone's boss, nor did I ever aspire to be. I was the quiet fixture in the background, the one who kept the gears turning when no one else paid attention. I managed the billing, coordinated shipment schedules, double-checked compliance, forms, and kept clients calm when things inevitably went wrong. I didn't chase praise, but I always ensured the job got done. And maybe, in doing so, I let them forget how much I mattered. Everything changed the day Crestview was acquired by a private equity firm. Overnight, the air in the building turned colder. Departments were restructured, titles shuffled, and the word efficiency started showing up in every memo. Then came Lucas Grant, a 29-year-old MBA with designer shoes and a surgically polished smile. He was appointed regional manager and entered our quiet office like a storm in a tailored suit. Lucas was all flash and jargon, with more interest in spreadsheets than people. Within his first week, he began an internal audit. He questioned our workflow, criticized our documentation methods, and smirked at our paper-based systems, like we were fossils from another era. I didn't argue, I observed, I kept notes. It was the Freeman account that became the breaking point. Freeman Distributors had been our loyal client for 16 years, and I had handled their paperwork personally from day one. But one Monday morning, news spread like wildfire. The Freeman contract had fallen through, a shipment delay, a clause dispute, then radio silence. Within days, the account was gone. During the Monday team briefing, Lucas stood at the front of the room and with calculated disappointment turned to me. "Jennifer," he said, voice low but theatrical, "I entrusted you with Freeman. We've lost one of our longest-standing clients because of a preventable oversight." I sat motionless, the words hitting harder than I expected. What Lucas didn't mention, what no one else in the room knew, was that he had reassigned the Freeman file to his new process improvement analyst 3 weeks earlier. But he needed a scapegoat, someone forgettable, disposable. I was perfect. That afternoon, HR summoned me for a performance review. My email access became restricted. My keycard stopped working after hours. Rumors swirled, quiet, cruel. Whispers that I was being encouraged to retire. They offered me 6 weeks severance if I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I didn't sign. I didn't fight back either. Not yet. Instead, I cleaned out my desk slowly, methodically. I left behind a few things: a highlighted copy of the Freeman contract, an unsigned internal memo, sticky notes on compliance discrepancies I'd seen but never mentioned. And every night at home, I began building something no one expected from the admin lady. A case, not for HR, for myself. What Lucas didn't know, what almost everyone had forgotten, was that 10 years ago, during a rough quarter, Crestview's founding partners had offered a few long-term employees a chance to buy discounted equity. A symbolic thank you, they said. Most declined. I didn't. My modest investment gave me a minuscule share of company ownership, but more importantly, it granted me access to shareholder meetings, not as a visitor, as a voting stakeholder. The next one was scheduled in less than 3 months. I may have been invisible to Lucas, but I wasn't powerless. I was watching, listening, waiting. And for the first time in my career, I was planning something of my own. The first few days after I left Crestview were strange. For the first time in over 20 years, I didn't have a routine. No early commute, no lunch packed in glass containers, no inbox filled with questions only I knew how to answer. It was like stepping off a moving train and realizing the world kept going without you. But I wasn't grieving. I was calculating. I set up a small workspace in the corner of my apartment, nothing fancy. Just a clean desk, a filing cabinet, and my old personal laptop. I wasn't trying to start over. I was preparing for one final act. Revenge, yes, but not the screaming kind. I wanted precision, dignity, a reckoning, not a tantrum. Every morning, I pulled out the manila folders I'd brought home. Contracts, internal memos, emails I'd printed before they could disappear. I sifted through everything Lucas had touched, the reassignments, the rushed deals, the approvals that didn't line up. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Lucas wasn't just careless, he was reckless. More than that, he was hiding things. The Freeman loss hadn't been a mistake. It was sabotage. Crestview's private equity owners wanted to push out long-standing accounts that didn't offer growth potential and replace them with high-risk, high-reward contracts Lucas had lined up with newer, flashier clients. Freeman didn't fit the model, but blaming a veteran employee made the transition smoother. Quiet. No questions asked. Over the next few weeks, I reached out to old contacts, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Freight managers, former clients, even a retired compliance officer who still kept tabs on industry news. I asked careful questions. I listened more than I spoke. And slowly, I pieced together something bigger than just a lost account. Lucas had violated at least 3 federal transport regulations and signed off on internal reports that contradicted public filings. That's when I contacted Diane. Diane Calloway was a name that most people in the company had forgotten, but not me. She was the former head of legal at Crestview, forced into early retirement during the acquisition. But Diane hadn't disappeared. She'd started consulting independently. When I called her and explained my findings, she didn't hesitate. You bring the documents, I'll bring the flashlight. Together, we spent 6 weeks going through everything. Diane was meticulous. She flagged every instance of procedural negligence, every forged timestamp, every manipulated report. By the end, we had a dossier. Not a complaint, not a grievance, a weapon. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on Crestview's shareholder board calendar. The next meeting would be held on a Thursday afternoon in early March, downtown at the Equity Group's Chicago office. Attendees were mostly silent partners, investment reps, and executives who treated the event like a formality. But I had a seat. I had the right to speak. And more importantly, I had the right to ask for a vote. The night before the meeting, I stood in front of my closet longer than I cared to admit. I didn't want to wear anything loud or defiant. I wanted to look forgotten, underestimated. I chose a charcoal suit I hadn't worn in 5 years. Conservative, unthreatening. Then I slipped Diane's folder into my briefcase and rehearsed the first 3 sentences of my speech until they rolled off my tongue like water. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was ready. By the time I walked into that room, I knew every person seated around the table. I knew what they had invested, how long they had held their shares, and which ones had the power to push Lucas out, if they had reason to. I was about to give them one. The boardroom was colder than I expected, not just from the aggressive air conditioning, but from the silence that greeted me when I walked in. Polished walnut table, leather chairs, 10 men in dark suits, all older than Lucas, but younger than me. The kind of men who never noticed women like me unless we brought them coffee or printed their meeting packets. But I wasn't here to serve. I was here to speak. Lucas was already seated, 4th chair from the head of the table, sipping something expensive from a glass bottle. He didn't notice me at first. Why would he? To him, I had vanished 3 months ago. He was the new face of Crestview, young, ambitious, hungry. His suit was sharper, his hair even more immaculately styled than I remembered. The only thing that hadn't changed was the smugness. When he finally glanced up and saw me, something flickered across his face. Confusion first, then disbelief, then just for a second, fear. I didn't sit right away. I placed my briefcase on the table, slowly unlatched it, and pulled out the folder Diane and I had so carefully prepared. I slid it to the head of the URI table, where Mr. Kilburn, the chairman of the Equity Group, sat reviewing reports with glazed indifference. Before today's agenda begins, I said, voice calm but resolute, I'd like to request that the board review this material. It pertains to financial misrepresentation and procedural violations by Regional Manager Lucas Grant. Every head turned. Lucas let out a short, incredulous laugh. I'm sorry, is this a prank? She doesn't even work here anymore. I looked, straight at him, then at the board. He's right, I don't. But I am a shareholder, and as such, I have the right to raise concerns that impact the financial and legal stability of this company. Mr. Kilburn looked mildly amused, but he opened the folder. The room shifted. Pages turned, brows furrowed. Silence stretched into minutes as they flipped through the documentation, emails, time-stamped logs, discrepancies in shipment reports, even a legal memo co-signed by Diane Calloway outlining the exposure risk if regulators discovered the missteps. Lucas tried to speak again. None of this is all being taken out of context. These are procedural hiccups, not violations. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The Freeman contract was intentionally derailed to make way for a client with questionable credentials, one who defaulted on payment weeks later. That's not a hiccup. That's sabotage. And this board deserves to know whether the man managing a multi-million-dollar region has the discipline and the integrity to do the job. Mr. Kilburn looked up from the packet, his voice slow and deliberate. Mr. Grant, is it true you reassigned legacy accounts without board consultation? Lucas stiffened. I was given authority to streamline. That's not what I asked. Lucas glanced around the room, but no one came to his defense. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence weigh on him. Finally, one of the investment partners spoke. We'll need to convene privately to discuss disciplinary measures. Lucas stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. This is a witch hunt. She's bitter. She's irrelevant. She's gone. Outdated? Replaceable? I asked quietly. That's what you thought. That's why you never looked twice at me. But some of us don't scream when we're wronged. We build cases. We wait for the right room. And this was the room. Mr. Kilburn nodded toward the door. You're excused, Mr. Grant. Lucas looked around, searching for someone to stop this. No one moved. He left. When the door clicked shut behind him, no one clapped. No one said thank you. But they kept reading. And when I walked out 20 minutes later, the folder was still on the table. Open. Marked. Under review. I didn't smile. Not yet. There was still more to do. I returned to Crestview the same way I had left it. Quiet, unnoticed, uncelebrated. There was no fanfare, no welcome banner, no email from HR alerting the office that Jennifer Blake is back. But I wasn't looking for applause. What I needed now was proximity, access, visibility, on my own terms. After Lucas was suspended pending investigation, the board did something no one expected. They offered me a consulting position. Temporary, of course. Strictly transitional, Mr. Kilburn had said during our follow-up meeting. We need someone who understands the legacy systems and has the trust of the staff. He didn't say the rest out loud. Someone they won't be afraid of. I nodded and accepted. I wasn't there to chase titles. I was there to finish something. On my first day back, I arrived 10 minutes before the office opened, parked in the same spot I'd used for years, and walked through the glass doors like I had never left. A few heads turned. A few eyes widened, then quickly darted away. Whispers followed me down the hallway, but no one dared ask questions. I was a ghost in a gray suit, walking among the living. Marlene, the receptionist, gave me a half smile. Jennifer, it's good to see you again. It's good to be seen, I replied, and meant it. They gave me a temporary badge, a cubicle near the executive wing, and a vague list of operational priorities. But I had my own list. It started with names. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved through the building like a surgeon, silent, precise, and methodical. I met with department heads, reconnected with old colleagues, and requested one-on-one sit-downs under the guise of rebuilding internal cohesion. What I was really doing was identifying where the rot had spread. Lucas hadn't acted alone. That became obvious within days. His so-called efficiency team had been cherry-picked, young, ambitious hires who didn't mind cutting corners if it meant they could attach their names to bold results. They had manipulated data, sidelined veteran employees, and helped Lucas hide discrepancies behind a wall of jargon. One of them, a woman named Tasha Chen, had even deleted archived contracts under the pretense of digital optimization. I documented everything. Each meeting ended with polite smiles and handshakes, but I could see it in their eyes. Unease. They didn't know what I knew, but they could sense it. My presence was no longer invisible. It was threatening. By the end of the month, I had compiled a new report, not just about Lucas, but about the culture he left behind. It detailed procedural failures, policy breaches, and internal emails that made even Diane wince when she read them. But I didn't submit it yet. Timing was everything. I needed to make sure the right person read it first. Her name was Lillian Masters, the new executive liaison assigned to Crestview from the equity firm. A no-nonsense woman in her mid-50s with steel gray hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for turning around mismanaged companies without blinking. She had ignored me in the first board meeting. But now, she scheduled a lunch. We met at a quiet restaurant 3 blocks from the office. She ordered tea. I ordered water. "You've made quite the impression," she said, folding her napkin once precisely. "I tend to," I replied. "I've reviewed your initial notes," she continued. "Your conclusions about Lucas's leadership style are unsettling." "It wasn't just his leadership," I said, sliding the second folder across the table. "It was his system, and it's still in place." She opened it, scanned the first page, then paused. "You're not looking for reinstatement, are you?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm looking for change, and for someone to actually hold the mirror up to this place before the next Lucas walks through the door." Lillian tapped her finger once against the folder. Then she smiled, small, tight-lipped, but unmistakably genuine. "You're not just a consultant, Jennifer. You're a reformer." "I'm whatever this place needs me to be," I said, "until it no longer needs people like me at all." 2 days later, the first of Lucas's inner circle was quietly let go. Another resigned before formal questioning. By the end of the week, 3 departments were under audit. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything on LinkedIn. I showed up the next day with a fresh stack of reports and kept going, because I wasn't done. There was still one more name on my list, the man who signed off on every decision Lucas made, who approved his budget, who praised his vision in public, while ignoring warning signs behind closed doors. Richard Hollins, the CFO. He'd been silent through all of it. Not because he was unaware, but because it suited him. Lucas had been his pawn, and I intended to make that fact public at the next shareholder meeting, but not yet. First, I had to remind Crestview why I was never just the admin in the corner. I was the one who remembered everything. Richard Hollins had always been an expert at staying clean. That was his greatest talent. Not finance, not logistics, not operations. No, Richard knew how to leave no fingerprints. When things went right, he was on the memo thread, CC'd just below the CEO. When things went wrong, he was conveniently out of the office, traveling or buried in strategic work. He had survived 3 CEOs, 2 restructurings, and 1 merger, by doing exactly what he did to Lucas, choosing the right proxy, then stepping back and letting them take the fall. I had watched Richard for years from a distance. He rarely spoke to lower-tier staff, never made eye contact in the elevator. He wasn't unkind, just untouchable. A quiet force in a corner office with a panoramic view and bulletproof job security. But now, for the first time, he had a problem with a name and a memory. Me. When Lucas fell, Richard didn't flinch. He issued a brief statement about reaffirming Crestview's values, offered HR full cooperation, and approved severance packages without a second glance. He thought it would end there. A rogue manager punished, a few policy tweaks made, and business as usual would resume. He was wrong. I knew Lucas had never had the authority to reallocate legacy accounts on his own. The Freeman sabotage, the reshuffling of compliance staff, even the approval of inflated shipping projections, those all required sign-off from finance. And finance meant Richard. The problem was, proving it wasn't easy. Richard never sent direct orders. He never signed off in ink, but there were breadcrumbs. Emails with "looks fine to me" in the body. Calendar invites marked verbal approval. Granted. Most damning of all, a budget spreadsheet modified at midnight with hidden columns reclassified under vague headers like Forward Momentum Fund. Lucas might have pulled the trigger, but Richard had loaded the gun. I didn't rush. I spent 6 weeks digging. I met with mid-level finance analysts off the record. I asked questions no one had asked before, about line items, about phantom clients, about inconsistent audit flags that had been cleared with no explanation. Most people didn't even realize what they were sitting on. A few did. One man, Eric Dallin, had quit a year earlier after a disagreement with Richard. He now worked at a smaller firm in Evanston, and after some coaxing, he agreed to meet me. Over 2 hours and 3 cups of black coffee, Eric walked me through what he had seen: projection padding, risk shifting, cost reallocation tactics that danced on the line between legal creativity and fraud. He never said anything outright, Eric told me. But the implication was always there. Make the numbers shine, don't ask too many questions, and your career will stay smooth. I had enough. But unlike with Lucas, I couldn't rely on a theatrical boardroom confrontation. Richard was smarter, older, and had deeper roots. To remove him, I needed more than evidence. I needed leverage. So I used the one thing he hadn't accounted for: the loyalty of people like me. I started small. I gave HR a revised set of training guidelines that, on the surface, looked like a standard compliance overhaul. But buried in the appendix were examples, real ones, from Richard's department. Not accusations, just patterns. I let Lillian find them. Next, I met with the new CFO candidate quietly being vetted behind the scenes, a woman named Marissa Lung, formerly with Transcon Freight, smart, sharp, and most importantly, immune to Richard's internal alliances. I showed her the numbers, the red flags. She asked me one question: "If I move forward with this, will you speak at the hearing?" I nodded. "I'll do more than speak. I'll stand behind every word I've put in writing." 1 week later, Richard was called into an executive compliance session, an unprecedented move for a man in his position. No press release, no public statement, just a calendar event and a closed door. He emerged pale, tight-jawed, and silent. 2 days later, he resigned. Health reasons, the company memo said. There was no farewell cake, no framed plaque. He left the same way he operated, quietly, with no mess. But this time, no one was fooled. Everyone knew. The man behind the curtain had finally run out of curtains. I sat at my desk, still labeled temporary consultant, and looked out at the office. People moved differently now. There was less fear, more breathing room. Conversations didn't stop when I walked by anymore. Some even smiled. One junior analyst left a note on my desk: "Thank you for not forgetting us." I folded it gently and placed it in the top drawer. I didn't need trophies. I had something better. Control, not the title, not the corner office. Just the quiet knowledge that the systems now answered to people with integrity, and that anyone who tried to build another Lucas or another Richard would know there was someone watching. My name is Jennifer Blake, and I remember everything. It came in a plain envelope. No grand gesture, no email from the board, just a cream-colored envelope left on my desk early one Monday morning, its edges crisp, the paper heavy with intent. My name was written in ink, not typed, not stamped. That was the first sign this wasn't procedural. Inside was a single sheet. "We would like to formally invite you to consider the permanent role of Director of Internal Operations for Crestview Logistics." My fingers didn't tremble, but my breath did catch for a moment. I stared at the words, reading them twice, then again. After months of peeling back lies, exposing rot, and pulling strings from behind closed doors, the curtain was now open, and they were asking me to step forward. For 24 years, I'd been the one no one looked at twice. The background voice. The one who knew where the binders were, who called the repairman, who reminded executives of their own deadlines. I was never seen as a leader, not even by myself. Until now. I set the letter down and leaned back in my chair. The office was quieter than usual. The storm had passed. Lucas was gone. Richard had vanished. New hires were onboarding. Procedures were being rewritten. For the first time in years, the place felt breathable again. And now, they wanted me to lead it. I should have felt triumphant, empowered. But what I felt instead was tired. Not exhausted, just aware. Aware that leadership came with its own kind of silence, a different kind of invisibility. And maybe that's why they chose me. Not because I was loud, but because I had proven I could wield power without turning it into a weapon. Later that afternoon, I met with Lillian in her temporary office. She was reviewing Q2 projections, her reading glasses low on her nose, a mug of untouched green tea by her side. "You got the envelope," she said without looking up. I did. And? It surprised me. She finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. "You earned it, Jennifer. More than anyone in that building. You already run the place, even if no one says it out loud." "That's exactly what concerns me," I said quietly. "I don't want the title to silence what I've built. Sometimes, the most honest work happens when you're underestimated." Lillian nodded slowly. "True. But it also means you're the one cleaning up after those who weren't." I didn't answer. She stood, walked over to the window, and spoke without turning. "Let me tell you something I've learned after 3 decades in boardrooms like this. They never expect women like us to stay angry. They expect us to get tired, to be grateful for the crumbs, to fade into grace." I said nothing. "But you didn't fade. You made them look. And now they're afraid of what happens if you leave." I let her words hang in the air. That night, I walked home instead of driving. The city was still thawing from the tail end of winter, and the sidewalks were wet with melting snow. I passed a bakery I used to stop at on Fridays. It had new owners now, new sign, same smell. Change was everywhere. But not all change needed to be loud. At home, I pulled out a journal I hadn't touched in years. Its pages were filled with notes from my early days at Crestview, to-do lists, vendor contact names, shipping schedules. The handwriting had changed. The woman who wrote those pages had changed too. I thought about the younger women still in that office, the ones who watched me quietly, who noticed what I'd done even if no one said it aloud. If I took the role, I could protect them. If I stayed quiet, someone else might come in and undo everything. And I thought about something Eric Dallin said, over coffee. Leadership doesn't always mean being at the top, but sometimes you have to be close enough to stop the next fall. The next morning, I came in early. I placed the acceptance letter on Lillian's desk. Signed. I didn't make a speech. I didn't schedule an announcement. I just got to work. By noon, my nameplate had been updated. Jennifer Blake, Director of Internal Operations. Someone brought flowers, someone else brought cupcakes. Marlene cried. I thanked them all and then closed my door. Because titles weren't the reward. This office wasn't the destination. The reward was the silence, the stillness, the knowledge that I was finally where I needed to be. Not as a figurehead, not as a ghost, but as the spine of a company that would no longer forget women like me. And quietly, steadily, I began to build something stronger than fear. Legacy. 6 months later, the building looked the same, but it no longer felt familiar. It wasn't colder. It wasn't warmer. It was steadier. Like a ship that had weathered a storm and finally found calm water. The panicked footsteps, the whispered hallways, the sharp-edged silences that used to choke every Monday morning. They were gone now. In their place was something I hadn't seen at Crestview in years. Trust. People started arriving on time again, not because they feared punishment, but because they felt heard. Meetings were shorter because no one was performing. Policies got rewritten, and not behind closed doors. I didn't lead with slogans or mission statements. I led with structure, with boundaries, with accountability, and they responded. I never moved into the corner office. That space was too symbolic, too soaked in the ghosts of men who had used it like a throne. I chose an office next to HR instead. A message to everyone. I wasn't here to rule. I was here to rebuild. But with that stability came a strange kind of distance. People respected me. They nodded in the hallways, waited for my input, deferred to my decisions. But they rarely asked me how I was. And truth be told, I wasn't sure I had an answer. Leadership had given me purpose, yes. But it had also taken something I hadn't expected, the illusion that I could ever go back to the woman I was before all this. One afternoon in late September, I stayed past 7 p.m. The floor was empty. The office hummed with fluorescent quiet. I opened the blinds and looked out across the skyline. Chicago at dusk, all gold and blue like memory pressed into glass. That's when I saw her. Young, maybe mid-20s, new hire from client services. She stood alone in the lobby, flipping nervously through a stack of documents. Printer jammed, elevator stuck. I recognized the look, the I don't want to bother anyone hesitation of someone who had been taught to shrink. I walked out of my office, took the stairs down, and found her exactly where I expected, next to a blinking error message on the copier. She startled when she saw me. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was still—" "It's okay," I said gently. "Let me show you a trick." I fixed the jam, cleared the queue, handed her the documents. She smiled, relief flooding her face. "Thank you, Ms. Blake." "Really?" I paused. "No need to call me Ms. Blake," I said. "Just Jennifer." She nodded, still unsure whether she was allowed to relax. "Can I give you one piece of advice?" I added before she left. "Of course." "Don't wait 20 years to speak up." She blinked. "I won't." And I believed her. That night, I didn't go straight home. I stopped by the old diner I used to frequent when my days ended in exhaustion. Instead of strategy. Same fluorescent lights, same laminated menus. I ordered black coffee and a grilled cheese. I didn't look at my phone once. I sat and let myself remember. Not Lucas, not Richard, not the reports or the resignations. But the little moments, the unpaid overtime, the missed birthdays, the kindnesses no one saw. The years I spent invisible not because I lacked value, but because they lacked vision. And then I smiled. Because I had outlived all of it. Because I had proven them wrong. Not by shouting, not by burning everything down, but by standing still while the tide rolled in and washed away everything that wasn't built to last. The next morning, a new plaque was added to the company's wall. Of service. My name. 24 years and counting. I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't approved it. Someone had simply decided that what I had done mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I let that be enough. My name is Jennifer Blake. I was the woman they forgot, the one they pushed aside, the one they thought would stay silent. But I stayed. And because I stayed, everything changed.